It's wonderful to have you all here to be with us to discuss this important topic. The college is very much committed to DEI, and we're hoping that this will become a series soon. So just to go over a few quick Zoom housekeeping rules. Hold on one moment. Please turn off your camera if you're comfortable doing so. We would love to see you all. If you're not, we completely understand. Gabby Salib and I will be monitoring the chat throughout the discussion, so you're welcome to add your questions there. We'll do more of an interactive Q&A after the half hour. And as you heard, the session is indeed going to be recorded. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague and friend, Ms. Gabby Salib, who's a PhD candidate at the college in the Information Science Department. Gabby.
Thank you so much, Marie. We are so excited to have everyone today. Thank you all so much for coming out. As Marie mentioned, my name is Gabby Salib. I'm a doctoral candidate in information science, and I serve alongside Marie in CCI's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. We're excited to present this event on behalf of the DEI Council alongside the Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation and the Office of Alumni Relations. Today, we have Dr. Michelle Rogers, an incredible associate professor in the Department of Information Science at the college, and is currently on assignment at NSF. And also joining Dr. Rogers today is alumna Dr. Quincy Brown, who is currently serving as Senior Policy Advisor in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, huge. And previously, Dr. Brown has served as a program director for STEM education research at AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, as well as the senior director for innovation research at anitaB.org. And the council has been so excited with in getting involved with AnitaB and getting more of our students to attend Grace Hopper and the mentorship involved with Grace Hopper. So we're excited to hear about all of your experiences through this path. And I'll hand it over to Dr. Rogers to kick us off.
Thank you, Gabby, for a wonderful introduction. And once again, I want to offer my welcome to everyone here and just encourage you to actively participate in the conversation. So as Marie mentioned, we're going to collect questions in the chat. And about halfway through the hour, we will wrap up our conversation in order to get you all involved. But we really wanted to highlight Dr. Quincy Brown and to talk about not only her experience in STEM and her, luckily, she was a Drexel grad, to talk about female engagement across the STEM professions. Because as the DEI Council has been presenting and trying to address, we really need to get our hands around this problem and begin to actively think about what we can do to advance the field. So Quincy, we're gonna start off kind of talking about your experience with STEM, your time here at Drexel, and kind of get that grounding before pivoting to talk a little bit about STEM jobs and what the outlook what it's looking like for the future of making STEM professions represent the nation more as a whole. So Quincy, we can start off if you can talk a little bit about yourself and your background and what inspired you to pursue a career in STEM and how you see yourself in that area now.
Absolutely. And before I answer that, I will say that just so people know, I don't have access to chat. So if you all are chatting away and typing in chat, I can't see it on this on the version of Zoom that I'm using. So I'm not ignoring you. I just can't tell. But I will say, so I am originally from the Bronx, New York. I was born and raised in the Bronx. I went to what I'll call the best high school in the country, Bronx High School of Science. And so I was always a bit of a, math, science, STEM geek. I guess I don't know if we called it STEM back then. I mean, it's been a while, but I love math. I've always loved math. I won't say that I was always good at math. but I like numbers and patterns and, those kinds of things. I went to undergrad at North Carolina A&T State University. So I went to an HBCU. I majored in electrical engineering because, let me say this. So when I was in high school, I went to a program at Coast Guard Academy and decided I was going to go into the Coast Guard because at the academy, the students at the time got a PC. I didn't have one, and I was like, this is how I can get a computer. I also can't swim. Well, I shouldn't say that. I learned to swim this summer. So I had no idea how to swim and discovered that you have to like jump off a boat into water and save someone. And so I knew that I
couldn't go to Coast Guard.
Yeah, that wasn't that was it for that.
Right.
The program that I attended was about engineering. I learned about engineering. I fell in love with circuits and, building circuits and breadboards and all of that. And so that's why I majored in electrical engineering. And so when I graduated, I worked in the defense and telecom industry for about 10 years or so in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So I left North Carolina, moved further south to warmer weather, and worked there and started writing, a little software, but it was more about software to test hardware, and worked in manufacturing. And like I said, did that for about 10 years. And I guess since we're among family, I'll tell the full parts of the story.
Okay.
I decided at some point, that I was going to go back to school. I was working on like a software engineering degree. I don't think I really knew what software engineering was, but it was like something I could do, I could fit into my work schedule, but I don't think I really, in hindsight, didn't really know, but I learned a lot while I was in that program. And soon thereafter, I got laid off. And so I was working at Nokia at the time and got laid off. And was suddenly like, what am I going to do with like my life, right?
Right.
Now I have no job. And that was a very, unsettling and unfamiliar experience for me because my parents, worked the same job from whenever they started until they retired. And so this whole notion of, finding a new job, like all of that was just foreign to me. And so somewhere in there, I decided I was going to go to school full time. I was interested in games and educational games, and somehow stumbled on Drexel University and applied to the computer science program. Again, I don't also think I fully appreciated what computer science actually was, because though I was EE and knew computer science students, and rewrote programs, and I didn't understand like the science of computer science, right? Like really what it was. But I applied and got accepted, and packed my family up. We were in Texas and we moved to the Philadelphia area. Somewhere in there, I got an email. I don't remember exactly who it was from, that said, hey, there's this, Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation, Bridges to the Doctorate Program. You should have, fill this out. And I was like, okay, I will fill this out. I saw Dr. Cox just appear on my screen. And so, I filled that out, and, soon thereafter, I got this like, welcome,
right?
Bridges to the Doctorate, a BD fellow. Here's, show up. I came into the department, showed up, met, my cohort of BD fellows, and started this journey that I really had no idea, what I was in for, what it was, and just found myself in the department that was very different than what I was accustomed to from, going to A&T. It was also had been, by that point, 10 years or so since I had actually been in school. And so there were a lot of things that I used to know that I didn't remember. I knew I used to know it, but I also knew I didn't remember it anymore. Right. And so my first class, they were talking about logarithms, and I was like, wow, I used to know this. Right. And so I spent a lot of time though, really, backtracking for my personal knowledge, right? Because I just had to get myself together. But had a lot of, really did have a lot of support in the department and through the LSAMP program with Dr. Cox, Steve, and Venice Keene and folks there were tremendously helpful in me just understanding as a returning student how to navigate. By that time, I had also, I had two daughters with me, and, I'd lug them to campus on occasion and tell them, college is where you go after high school, right? So
right.
Spent a lot of time on campus, got a lot of parking tickets,
right.
Along the way. And so, but it was just, like I said, I'm misty seeing all these faces and familiar names, because it really was a time where I learned so much about, the discipline, but just kind of where I fit in. Thinking about my interest, I started out with Frank Lee as an advisor. Dario became my co-advisor by the time all was said and done, and, had an opportunity to explore the space of computing, to see, where my interests lie, where I was going to fit in and be able to excel.
Thank you so much. And we appreciate all of the LSAMP folks that are on, because just as you said that, Steve came up on my top screen as well. Can you talk a little bit more about the mentorship part of your experience? I think, as you said, because we have some alum on the line, there is a challenge with especially if your undergrad was in something different than CS or IS. Can you talk about the role mentorship played in helping you make that shift and through completion?
Yeah, so I would say I had different sets of mentors. Okay. Right. So the LSAMP folks were super helpful in just navigating, like, what is this graduate school thing? Again, I felt like I jumped in the deep end just because it's like, and just went for it. Right. I didn't really know. And so they were there to, talk to me about going to a conference. Right. So we went to a jam or something like that. Right. I got to go to DC. Right. And, just helping me navigate the general space of being a graduate student, like what it really means to get a master's degree and a PhD. That's not something, again, that, from my family I had experience with or had seen people do. And so that was really great, like at a meta scale, I should say. But then within the department, having, advisors, like I said, Frank and Dario, great professors who were there to like really push me to take, like I said, I did my quals and take another class, right? Computational geometry, I'll never forget, right?
Right.
But and it was good. It really, it pushed me in ways that I would not have done, on my own. And so having people in the department who could advise me and mentor me and provide support, help me, learn to write papers, was really, really important in like just figuring out how to make it through a computer science PhD, right? As opposed to any PhD.
Right.
So I think that combination was really helpful. And then of course the other students who were in the department, we all, were kind of in that together, studying and sharing notes and just trying to, we'd kind of muse around our backup carears as running food trucks, right? Like just in case things didn't work out. Right. So I think having that, multiple sets of mentors, not looking for any one individual to serve all the needs was really key for me.
Exactly. So before we move on, could you just give us a little snippet of, if you could look back to the 20-year-old, 18-year-old Quincy, what would you tell yourself about embarking on this journey in STEM? So whether it be engineering or computer science, what would you tell yourself now that you learned, over the time?
I would tell myself to trust what I know.
Okay.
I think it's easy to let a lot of outside forces, a lot of the data and statistics and comments people make kind of get into your head and shake you a little bit or a lot bit at times. So I would tell myself to trust what I know. I would also tell myself, because I'm still a work in progress, right, that there's the networking and the social, I call the people stuff that, I'm content being in my basement, right?
Okay.
Machine. Like that part of the work is equally important. So, right, being technically sound, but also understanding the importance of the networking and I call it the people stuff. For building a career is more important than I realized or even imagined early on.
Understandable. So now a little bit kind of building off of that and slight pivot. In 2021, one of the things that was the impetus for this conversation was about a report that the Pew Research Center released about STEM jobs seeing an uneven progress in increasing gender, racial, and ethnic diversity. So in particular, the kind of spotlight that kind of came out of that, I think we all kind of understood that women are disproportionately underrepresented in these fields, but it was kind of surprising to some, maybe not to all, that they were not underrepresented in all areas of STEM, that there were some areas where women were actually overrepresented. So could you kind of talk to, building on your experience or what you have done since graduating, about how you've seen that underrepresentation or seen that kind of uneven progress in terms of increasing the diversity in STEM?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things I've done is kind of look at history more than in thinking of the answer to these kinds of questions, right? And the role of gender and women's work, and so kind of thinking about how in computing, right? And we all watched Hidden Figures. We knew about early computers, where that was women's work. Women's work, right? Right. Over time, it changed, right? And then as the field grew and became more prestigious, right, the gender shifted. Right. Became men's work, right? And so there's a lot of ground to make up from where we were. But similar things have happened in health, right? I mean, that was, some of that started as being men's work, right? And now then it shifted to women's work. And so the imbalances there. I think they're historical roots. That's what I'm a long way of saying. Historical roots that I think people don't always pay attention to, that led to where we are. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, definitely. So as you think about those historical challenges, I have to say, as a fellow New York City public school graduate, I know that we have seen this kind of gender disparity from a long time. But as we think about driving change in the STEM fields, in computing in particular, right? So we've seen kind of slow but steady changes in other areas of STEM, but in computing, we've kind of seen it kind of plateau and then actually begin to decrease. Can you think about what are some of your thoughts around how do we drive change in this area?
Yeah, I think some of the conversations that I, this past year, right, however long we've been in the house, that I've been encouraged by are conversations, around culture and climate, right? Because there's the technical piece, right, and being technically competent, but there's also a piece about, how one is perceived, how one feels when they are in an environment, in a classroom, in a department that has equal weight, and sometimes more so, right? Walking into a room and being feeling very uncomfortable, that has an impact. Right. It has an impact. And I don't think that we've talked about that enough in computer science, in the computing space, and the role that has. And so I would love to see more conversations, direct conversation. I mean, they're not always comfortable, but I think they're necessary if we really want to kind of get past this plateau that we're at. And I also think that, there are assumptions that the field, broadly, generally speaking, make about, who's prepared, who's not prepared, right? And it's not thinking about what people are bringing to the table as their whole self, their experiences, all of that, and finding ways in our courses to be more inclusive in that thinking, right? About how one might solve a problem. You know, there's some people who can solve amazing problems. You know, they may have some other challenges, right? But we need those minds as well. And so we need to think about how to create programs that are inclusive of all the ways in which people think and problem solve and, you know, gain knowledge that are equally important as the ways, you know, we traditionally do.
A very, 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 very good point. So as we think about those changes, do you have ideas or can we extend the conversation beyond education into industry, into government, and what are some ways that we can begin to engage?
Well, that's a lot. I'm like, that's a lot.
Okay.
I think it's, some of it is, you know, starting early, right? Starting early, being intentional about the connections between engagement, because I think we also, I mean, I'm super guilty of this, right? Make assumptions about what people who are not in the space know, so that it's not as simple as, you know, we can have young people come in and, you know, do a program in the summer, which is great and absolutely needed. Right. And from there, I think we assume that they're supposed to know that this is a field they can go into, or this is what they can do next summer, or this is what they can do when they leave the program, right? So I think we have to become a lot more intentional about helping people see those connections, right? And make sure that they, I've been riding Peloton, right? I've been stacking my classes. So the experiences are, you know, are stacked, right? So
yes.
Right. They lead to somewhere that it doesn't have to be by accident that you happen to learn about, that was me, right? Like happen to learn about a program, but if I hadn't, I don't know what I would have done.
Right.
Yeah.
Very good analogy. I just started with the Peloton app. I didn't get a device. I'm doing the weight workouts on the app. But like you said, it does kind of track your participation. And I think we could go somewhere with that analogy. Thank you for that.
And I think it's important, right? I mean, some of the things I've been thinking about because of, you know, the times that we've been in is I think we have to be even more intentional because, you know, what's happening in K-12, you know, with have one day you're in virtual, right? I mean, it's just, there's a lot, right? And as much as I love computer science, I also recognize that, you know, in the big picture, right? On one hand, it's not the highest priority, right? I mean, people are, you know, there's some life and death things that are really, really happening that are impacting people that, you know, again, as much as I love it, I think may, you know, sit a little higher, but we have to be able to do both.
Right.
And we have to continue to engage and make sure that the people who are, you know, especially now impacted the most. I mean, there are issues with broadband, right? Health, well, I mean, all of these things, right? We have to really double down on making sure that our community is inclusive and extending, or I say the grace, right? And time to people who we say we want to make the space that may look different than what we, you know, envisioned or are used to, but we make the space for them to come in, right? And then once they're there, right, we've created spaces and we're changing our spaces so that they are inviting and they're welcome.
And that they can thrive once you get them.
They can thrive in, right? We just don't want people to just stumble their way, you know, crossing the finish line like the end of one of those rides. You're barely looking at the countdown, but you're
made
actually
it through, but you don't want to go again, right?
Yeah.
Very good. We thank you for all of these nuggets of wisdom that you're sharing with us. So as you think about some of these concerns, and you think about a place like Drexel, a place like CCI, would you have any suggestions about how you see a place like Drexel being able to be one of those change leaders, or one of those places that takes that extra consideration or makes the place a place of support and making spaces for women and other groups that are underrepresented to be able to thrive or feel comfortable?
Yeah, I think one of the things I think Drexel has a huge opportunity, right, is because of the model and the I'm blanking, the internships, which is right, like right. There's the co. Yes, thank you.
No problem.
There's an opportunity to work with industry, right, so that to ensure that all of, again, being intentional about these connections and the experiences that students have all the students have that, right? And that some of those practices that I know, like, I think since I graduated, I mean, it feels like forever now, since I graduated, there's the group focused on women, that was new, right? So there's some practices that I think academia could learn from industry and vice versa, right? And because you all have relationships with so many companies, I think there's an opportunity there to like collaborate, right? To really think big about what supports could be, right? Mentoring programs, all of those kinds of things. They're good opportunities, even in thinking about, challenges and projects, right? That are locally based, right? Addressing the needs and those kinds of things. I'm rambling, but I think.
Okay. Yeah. No, never rambling. And so as you think about these opportunities and what's out there in terms of education for, in particular, STEM education at the broad level, but CS education, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges? I know we talked a little bit about making people comfortable and making spaces for all people to survive, to be able to thrive in these environments. Is there anything particular about computing education that you think we should be keeping in mind, or has been on your radar right now?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that's been on my radar is this, it's math as a proxy, right? So I spent some time as a computer science professor at Bowie State University, and saw a lot of students, too many students who declared themselves to be CS majors, taking developmental math, many times. And there was a shift in just the way we had prereqs, right? So that students could take that course and start in the major, right? Start in the department. And so I think thinking again about how we have these proxies, math, right? Physics, right? That we know keep students out, or they don't end up staying or thriving because of, right? Like that we think differently about what it means, to remove those, to remove those very real barriers that don't have an impact on computing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So as we get to this point, what's next for you? You've shared wonderful information about CS across, various fields and landscapes. What's next for you as you think about your career and next steps?
I don't know. I mean, I never envisioned that I would be, working in policy in government, right? So, I enjoy being in this space. I think there's a lot of work to be done at the federal level. Being at OSTP is a unique opportunity. To personally to have had it twice is even more unique. And so I recognize that. When I'm done, I don't know. I just want to walk around outside and like hug people.
So, these days
I mean, I'm not opposed to going back to academia. If there's a right role for me there. I think there's just so much work to be done in so many places, and one of the things I've learned is that you meet people, you hear about their jobs, and you're like, I didn't know that job existed. I'm still learning about positions that I had no idea existed. And so I think having this foundation of computing, I don't want to say it's the best major in the world, but it provides a foundation, right? That allows, that really can, one of the things I learned in kind of doing the transition to government and policy work is that, there are a lot of skills that I've learned because of my background that are very transferable.
Right. Very much so. Very much so. And so before we go to the Q&A section, I did want to get your thoughts around one of the things that we were challenged with at CCI was originally we were focused around women in computing and realized that that kind of narrowed our focus. And so we kind of expanded it to look at women in tech in general, just because there are lots of women who computing might be too narrow of a focus, or they might not consider themselves in computing, but they use a computer every day, or they're involved in technology in some way. And so we expanded our look on women, or our focus on women, to include technology as a broad title. What are your thoughts around this idea of women in STEM versus women in computing, and how computing plays a role in this idea of STEM, and how we should identify ourselves as we move forward and think about programming and focused programs and things like that?
Yeah, I'm of two minds that
Okay.
like both and. Right?
Okay.
Because
right.
You know, as computer science as a discipline is a thing.
Right, exactly.
And so I try to get people who are not in the discipline to understand that, it is actually a discipline. You can get a degree in it, right? There's a SIP code. It's a thing.
Right.
And that needs some attention. The broader computing and technology community includes those people, but also so many more. And if you think about, where we are with technology and where it's heading, the impact it's having on our lives, we can't not think more broadly.
Right.
But I don't want the discipline to be left behind in that broad thinking, right? Because, another thing that I think about is kind of looking at some of the, not to be too wonky, like some of the data around, degree production, like some of the Talby reports from that CRA puts out, about gender, ethnicity, like who's getting degrees in what subfields, right? I kind of feel this, bifurcation happening. Again, amongst family, where, certain people from certain groups are getting degrees with, focus on AI, some of these other, right? And then others are kind of moving into, what some would see softer side, right? And so there's this power piece of this also that I want to make sure we are not, I can't think of the right word, we're not doubling down on, right? But that we really think about, in the discipline, like there should be lots of women in AI, right? There should be lots of women in quantum, right? There should be lots of women in algorithms because they're awesome.
Need them.
We need them, right? And we need them. We need everyone everywhere, I guess, right? Like we need everyone everywhere. And so I think, but I don't want the computing as a computer science as a discipline, right? To lose out on those minds because other places are thinking a little bit more broadly, a little bit more inclusively than, computers. I'm doing this box, right? The computer science as a discipline is.
And as computer scientists, the value has to be of that entire spectrum, right? So that I've been on conversations where certain subfields are not really computer science, whereas other fields are, considered real computer science. And we have to even watch our language around that. So we thank you.
Yeah, and I think, those are some of the most subtle messages, right? That people, that I don't think people are always consciously aware of that. But I think, over time and at scale, it has an impact. Definitely.
So Quincy, we thank you for your time. We thank you for this conversation. It has been definitely enlightening. And I know members of the DEI committee have been feverishly taking notes about the ideas that you shared. But also I know while talking, I did see there were some questions starting to be put in the chat. And so if Gabby or Marie would like to read off one of the questions, I think we can
Sure.
get Quincy's ideas
Yeah.
and answers.
Of course. Thank you both. Fantastic conversation. From Stephen Cox. How can faculty and administrators encourage students of color to promote the STEM disciplines like your own children?
Say that one more time.
Sure. How can faculty and administrators encourage students of color to promote the STEM disciplines like your own children? So that familial impact is how I'm interpreting that question.
Okay, looking for, okay, Dr. Cox is smiling.
Did I get it right, Dr. Cox? Okay.
I mean, I think, it's, I feel like we need to move beyond this appealing to hearts and minds part, but I think there's a part of that is important. And, we all have, we're someone's children, right? For better or worse, we have siblings, we have nieces, nephews. I mean, at some point, understanding and getting people to think beyond, all of the biases, right? And just see our students as students, right? I think making faculty aware of their own biases, aware of their own privilege, even in their own preparation. I mean, I acknowledge, I went to Bronx High School of Science. I had access to a lot that most students in the Bronx did not. I forget that sometimes. Right? And so I think, thinking about beyond just, race and gender, but there are other privileges that we have, that faculty, that some faculty have, and just being able to bring voice to that and help them see beyond, see that, but then be able to see past that, I think would be helpful, right?
Totally agree.
Because I was gonna say, because I think about my own children, right? And there's some things they do, I just don't get it. I don't know. I need somebody else to help them, right? I mean, and so I think they're again seeing beyond, myself, right? What my experiences were, to realize, these set of young folks are having an entirely different experience that I can't relate to. And so I think it's expanding the way we think about students.
Yeah.
And actually our next question is a good segue off of that, in that you had discussed the people stuff that we should pay attention to, like on this journey through like our computing degrees. And a friend of mine who is a strong part of that network that you were talking about earlier, doing accountability with the PhD students in the program. She's asking, like, could you give an example of how the people stuff helped you in developing your career?
Yeah, so I was, let's see, when I left Bowie State as a professor, I took a leave of absence to do a AAAS fellowship. So they have a Science and Technology Policy Fellowship, which I think everyone should consider if you have any interest, even if you don't have interest in policy, because like we need these minds. But they had like in our orientation, they had a networking, like a workshop on how to network. I am happy to eat mini quiches in the corner. Like I'm very content to do that, and talk to the one person who I may know or no one, and eat my mini quiches. Right. But I mean, they were very in the workshop we learned about things that seem so simple: shaking hand, your name tag, how to enter a conversation, how to exit a conversation. So those kinds of things I have had to be very personally, I'm an introvert. Again, happy to eat my quiches in the corner. Talk to Gabby, I think we did that once. We were somewhere and there was a whole room full of people and we stood in the corner and we talked to each other. And then I left. But understanding that, as I enter more rooms, that it's not always, what that gets you in the room, it's who you know. As people ask me to do things that I'm like, did you mean to ask me? Because I don't know anything about that. But they're like, well, you're the person who came to mind, right? Like that part of networking and that part of building your career is, I think, the part that I didn't understand. I was like, well, if I just, get the highest grade in the class, surely everything will be fine. And, to some degree, yes. but there are other pieces to this, right? That because of the people stuff. And so learning how to network, like I always still have anxiety if I meet people to send like that follow-up. Thank you for talking to me. Like, it just seems so, but like, I know it's really, it's really important, right? And I know how I feel when people send them to me. And so, although I'm like, I don't know how to respond to this, I work at that. I don't have to work at like the other stuff. Those are the things that I have to work at. So like, I get Gabby's emails and I'm like, I'm going to respond, right? Like, because it's, it's that to me is work. And so, but it's really important. And now that I understand that more than I did before, I feel differently about doing that work.
We, in terms of the topic of building a career, actually, this is a question that I've wondered a lot, but from our audience, asking, how do we prepare for jobs that haven't been invented? Like, sometimes we're like applying our skills to spaces that haven't used them before.
Yeah, I think it's understanding what your skills are, right? So you're getting a computer science degree, but your skill set extends well beyond, algorithms, right? And data sets. So really being able to think about what your skills really are beyond your discipline, I think is one way to start to be able to think about how they'll transfer, right? There's a lot of, writing, analysis, those kinds of things I think you can do in many other domains. You can think critically. You can see, especially for graduate students, like you read a paper, it asks you kind of start to think about other questions, like, how to find things out, right? There's a portion of my day sometimes that I spend, I do a lot of Googling, right? For better or worse, but I know how to sift through information. And so I think thinking about what you're learning and the skills that you are honing beyond, the technical ones is important. And also looking at, every now and again, I'll go on job boards and, read job descriptions of like cool titles. And they have words like, do analysis. And I'm like, I know how to do analysis. I don't know anything else on the stage, but like, that's a skill that I have, right? And so looking kind of with an eye towards the future of the types of things people are looking for, I think is important or would be helpful.
And I think that question actually is a challenge to us in academia in how do we prepare students for careers that don't exist yet, but we still have students in these silos, right? So there was a movement, a number of years ago of CS plus X, where X could be anything else on campus. And there was a push for that. And I think what we've seen now is that maybe CS plus X isn't the right way to approach that situation. Maybe it's a full integration of these fields with CS, knowing that, as you said, Quincy, you have a skill set coming from CS and this other area that you're interested in, that integration is making something that doesn't exist. And I think for us, that's a challenge because we have regulations, we have rules, we have an academic senate, we have lots of other things that we have to do. But I think as academics, we are challenged to answer that question if we want to stay relevant and if we want to prepare students to really make a difference, right?
Yeah, so, and I think also having, in preparing students to not be, I would say, fearful of the unknown, right? But to kind of, have that exposure to say it's okay if you're working with, biologists, right? And like that's not your area, right? It doesn't have to be your area, right? Exactly. Like that's not what you're bringing to the table. And so to really understand like the unique value that we bring to the table. I think is good to impart to students because again, there's so much out there now. I was talking to someone about, like space and I'm like, I don't really know much about space, but like, let me tell you what I do know. And that's what they needed to hear, right? I've been learning a lot about space. And, some of these other areas that I don't have expertise in, but I'm open to that, right? Which I think is a huge step that, some people are not even there yet.
Right.
Michelle and Quincy, along the lines of talking about careers, we had a great question come in, particularly for women in the C-suite as women advance in their careers. What are things, as that diversity gap may widen, that they can do to prepare or to work in their own favor towards success at that level of leadership?
I struggle with that, right? Because I think I'm over, telling women that we shouldn't be who we are.
Yeah.
And so I think that, which is not what the question was saying, but right, I think that, where I like to push back on that is the C-suite needs to change, right? We are fine.
Right.
We're absolutely fine.
Yeah.
How we manage, how we navigate, again, like for me, working on my networking, how, like, those are all valuable skills, and being able to really understand how to leverage them, I think is where I would say maybe preparing, right? But generally speaking, I think we're pretty awesome.
Right. Great point.
Agreed. Gabby, did you want to pick up another question?
Yes. Well, I actually had a question of my own. I've been considering a lot. I know I'm like bypassing the line here. But I've been thinking a lot about resilience and just the role that it plays in success in computing, and I guess success across the board. But especially in spaces where, where I am not seeing as many people who look like me. And I'm just wondering, like, the role that you've seen resilience to play in your own experiences, Quincy and Michelle. I think I'd love to hear from both of you, and kind of how we teach techniques of resilience.
I don't know that I'll be honest, I don't know that I've been, intentional about having a technique about resilience. There have been times in my life where I feel like, that last 30 seconds of the Peloton ride, I'm just making it through to Friday, right? Just because that's all I can do.
Right.
And then there are times where, things haven't worked out the way that I've hoped or thought they would, where I've had to really be clear with myself about the fact that I am fine as I am, right? That you really don't let a lot of that outside noise rattle you inside, like who you are, what you know, like be sure in that. It's, again, it doesn't always work. Sometimes my resilience is, chocolate chip cookies, right? Like, I mean, that's just the reality. I have a candle that's behind me that like the label of it is resilient. And there are times when I'm having a meeting that I feel like is going to be hard. I will light that candle and be like, yes, you are resilient because your candle says you are, right? So I don't know if you have a better answer. And I think, maybe the older I get, the more I'm also a little bit like, I can't be or do anything. I'm like, yeah. So Michelle, I don't know if you have a different answer.
As you said, the older you get, I do think that you, at a certain point, you come to a understanding that there's only so much you can do. There are only 24 hours in a day. And the other thing that in particular I've noticed among STEM students and CS students, there is no contract or a word up on the wall that you have to do this by yourself, right? That this is not a solo journey that you are supposed to do by yourself to prove that you are some sort of super person. I think that we have to surround ourselves with people that can help us, people that can offer support. I think we have people, in administration there to offer you support. And I think we have to empower each other to reach out for that. And I think if 2020 and 2021 have told you nothing, it should have taught you that we can ask for help when we need it, and understand that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of understanding that this is going to take more than I have at this point.
And I think
we have
that
to be okay with that.
Yeah, I think that transparency is important because, you know, I don't know anyone who has done this by themselves.
Right.
They may not talk about the support
it.
they've gotten.
Exactly.
They may not talk about their network. They may not talk about, you know, right, like the, I hate to say, old tests that they received.
Right.
People are, they may not talk about those things.
Right.
But I don't know anyone.
That's right.
Who has done this by themselves. And I think it's this myth, right? People put on airs as though they do that make you feel like then you have to, but no one does.
No, they do not. Now, what we might see is that there are students who don't like to reach out. And so, as Quincy talked about earlier, we have to make environments welcoming so that students feel comfortable coming to us and expressing those feelings and those emotions. And so that's the reason why we need to change the systems so that the systems don't set up people to make them feel like this, the only way is for you to do this alone. You are the sole survivor. Like, that's not the goal, right? So we have to have a mirror up to our systems to make sure that we are not presenting this idea that we all have to do this by ourselves.
And to not leave it to students to reach out, right?
Exactly.
Right. To not leave it to them to reach out because, you know, again, there's one part you never know what's going on. But there's sometimes you see things are clearly something's going on, right? To just extend the hand anyway. Right.
Thank you both for that. Right. Extending some grace and always making people aware of support. I want to, with our final few minutes, go to Yolanda because I think she wrote a question in the chat and she has her hand up. Yolanda, did you want to ask your question directly or do you?
I can ask it really quickly. So I guess I'm gonna just read it out of the chat. So it was basically following up on what you were just talking about, Michelle. In the interest of promoting inclusion, scholarship, and advancement of diverse students in STEM careers, when thinking about mentoring and advocating, right? Because you talked about everybody really needs advocates, and sometimes they're certainly missing or lacking for diverse students in particular. How can faculty and administrators become better advocates for diverse students? I think great attention is paid to attracting students to our field, but not a lot of attention is paid to retention and continued promotion of individuals once we actually recruit them.
Yeah, I'll say Yolanda's one of those who were, you know, we were bumbling around our first year grad school together. But I think that, and maybe this is, you know, a little bit more for you, Michelle, but I think that, now I said that I think I forgot the question. You go first, sorry.
Oh, I think to Yolanda's point, it has been a fault that we are very good at telling people, oh, look, we're this great place, we're this great place. We put a lot of money into advertising and recruitment, but then once they get here, the support services often are lacking because like we were just talking about, if the student really had a problem, they would come ask me, not knowing that most students, they think, somebody put a comment in the chat that they think they're bothering you or they think you're too busy to hear their problem. And so I think that we have to, once again, it goes back to this system thing. We have to set up systems that once they get there, we don't forget that they got there. And how do we build in structure for them to be able to express what they need and give us feedback. We've tried over the years, Ali and some other faculty, we've tried to get feedback from students, from student leaders, because at a certain point, there has been a disconnect between what students want and think that faculty know they want and what faculty think students want or need. And we have to do a better job of communicating that to each other so we understand that when we're advocating for you, I'm advocating for what you really need and what you really want, as opposed to me thinking that I know what you need or what you want.
Yeah, and I think there's some relationship building, right? When I was teaching, you know, I would start out most of my classes talking about what I watched on TV last night. Very right, like we would have some conversation about different characters, and you know, the students knew I was a real person, and that, you know, they knew I liked chocolate cake. I mean, I kind of had to like just show up as I am, and then we could relate on a different level, right? It wasn't always about, you know, the work, right? They didn't feel like they were bothering me. They would tell me all sorts of things.
Right. Right. A little more than you want to know sometimes.
Yeah, but it was good, right? Because otherwise, if all they knew of me was, homework and assignments and problems on the board, I don't know that we would have, I would have been able to develop those relationships. And I think that's a piece that goes throughout a lot of what we've talked about is about relationships, right? It's beyond, it's more than just, what you're learning in your courses. It's really about these relationships and how you apply what you're learning and how you work with other people and support and serve other people as well. And develop technology in service of people.
Exactly.
Wow, thank you. I mean, this has been such a wonderful conversation, so insightful, and being mindful of time. Thank you so much to Drs. Rogers and Brown. We can't thank you enough for your time. And with that being said, thank you to LSAMP, thank you to Alumni Relations, and on behalf of CCI, we wish you a good afternoon and evening.